for patterns, tricks, stitches and tips, wands and needles, embroidery.
In this video, I'm going to be going over some embroidery thread basics to hopefully give you a little more confidence and to share some tips and techniques. If you're new to embroidery and just not really sure where to begin, I'm going to be giving a brief overview of a number of embroidery thread topics, which I hope that you'll find helpful if you're just starting out. But if you do already have a little bit of experience and maybe you're looking for help with just one specific topic versus a more comprehensive overview, go ahead and check out the comments. I'm going to link to several shorter videos where I discuss and demonstrate individual skills that you may find helpful. So to get started, we're going to look at a few different kinds of thread that you'll likely see as you start embroidering. I know from experience that it can sometimes be a little overwhelming to look at all the different types of thread out there and just not really know what to use or why to use it. So I hope this video will give you a little better understanding and ease some of that overwhelm for you. To begin, let's go ahead and look at our 6-strand embroidery floss, which is likely the thread you're going to use the most frequently. And this type of thread comes in a wide range of colors, and the strands can be separated to produce various thread thicknesses. The two most common brands you're going to see of this type of thread are DMC and Anchor. There are various generic brands as well. I mostly use DMC mostly because it is readily available in my area. But with both brands, you're going to have roughly the same number of color choices, and there are also conversion charts out there that can help you in substituting colors from one brand for the other. So don't ever feel like you need to run out and buy something new or have a full supply of both brands. They're very easily interchangeable. So we're going to come back to the 6-strand embroidery floss in a bit. But first, let's go ahead and look at another commonly used embroidery thread, which is our pearl cotton. Now, there are a few differences with the pearl cotton versus the 6-strand embroidery floss. The first being that it has a very unique rope-like structure to the fibers. And unlike the 6-strand embroidery floss, this thread is not meant to be separated. It comes in a few different thread thicknesses, and you'll find that it is sold both in balls like this and in skeins like our 6-strand embroidery floss is. Now, one of the advantages to this type of thread is that because you do not need to separate the strands, it's just ready to go right out of the package, so super simple. However, you may need to purchase multiple balls or skeins if you want or need various thread thicknesses. With this type of thread, there are also slightly fewer color choices, but that being said, there are definitely still plenty of options, and you really shouldn't have difficulty finding a shade to suit your needs. Moving on, one more cotton thread that you might see is cotton Redder's mat. Now this thread is slightly thicker than our 6-strand embroidery floss, as you can see, and it also has a more matte appearance to the fibers than the other cotton threads do. It's similar to the pearl cotton in that it is not meant to be separated, so you're just going to use it straight out of the package. And this thread isn't commonly used in embroidery. You're more often going to see it used for other kinds of needlework, but that being said, you can use it if you're after a little bit bolder look to your stitches, and you're often going to see it with the other embroidery threads and supplies. So I did want to go ahead and include it here so you would be aware of this thread. And so far, all the threads we've looked at have been cotton threads, but there are also wool embroidery threads, such as our Appleton's Cruel Wool or DMC's Eco Vita line. And as you might imagine, these types of thread have a very different texture than any of the cotton threads. They're a little more rough, a little more fuzzy, whereas the cotton threads are a lot more smooth. And you can see that they're roughly the same thickness as our 6-strand embroidery floss here. And one more type of wool that you're going to see is tapestry wool. And the tapestry wool is much thicker. It's more like a yarn. And all of these threads are obviously going to create a very unique texture. None of these are meant to be separated, so you're going to use them as is straight out of the package. And one final category of thread I wanted to make you aware of that you'll see occasionally is metallic threads, such as DMC's diamond threads or their light effects threads. Diamond comes in a spool in a 3-ply single strand, and then the light effects come in skeins, and this is actually a 6-strand thread that can be separated and divided. Both of them have a metallic sheen and texture, and this is going to be something that can really create some extra depth and interest to your embroidery, but they can also be a little fiddly to work with. So I really recommend gaining a little bit of experience before attempting to work with this type of thread. So this is not an exhaustive list of all the types of thread out there, but these are some of the more common types of thread that you're going to come across in embroidery, and kind of a basic look at the differences between them or why you might decide to use one over the other. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and look back at our 6-strand embroidery floss for a little bit, discuss a few details that will help us in using this type of thread. First thing to keep in mind is to pay attention to which end of the skein you're pulling your thread from. You're going to see that it comes packaged with 2 small labels securing either end of the floss. The smaller label just has that DMC logo on it, and then the larger label has this barcode as well as the color name or color number on it. If you're using DMC, you always want to pull your thread from the end with the barcode and color name on it. This is going to ensure that your threads don't get twisted and knotted up as you're pulling that thread out. Depending on what brand you're using, that may affect which end of the skein you want to pull from. So if you're using something other than DMC, just do a little bit of research and figure out which end is the right end for your particular brand. So the next thing we want to pay attention to is going to be the length of our thread. The longer your thread is, the more likely it is to get twisted and knotted up, and that's going to be frustrating and eat up a lot of your time. On the flip side, if your thread's too short, that can be frustrating as well, because you're going to need to stop a lot more frequently and reload your needle. So a good method to use is just to use your forearm as a guide. You're just going to hold the loose end of that thread between your fingers and then pull that skein until you have a length of thread approximately the length of your forearm. You can go ahead and cut that off, and this is going to give you a really good length to work with. It's not too long, not too short. This is of course just a general guideline. It's not a hard fast rule. You'll learn as you go when it's okay to break that rule, and in my videos and stitch guides I will usually indicate when it may be appropriate to use a little more thread as well. Some stitches just naturally eat up a lot more thread, and so in those scenarios you may want to use a little bit longer length. With this 6-strand embroidery floss, it's also a really good idea to get in the habit of separating your thread. This is just going to help your stitches lay a lot more nicely on your fabric, and once again you'll learn with experience when it's okay to break that rule, but you're really never going to go wrong by separating your thread. So just a good habit to get into. I'm going to show you a technique that makes this process super easy. You're just going to hold the end of your thread and then just kind of separate out those individual strands. Once you have one strand isolated, you're just going to gently pull that through, holding the other strand secure with your opposite hand, and you'll see that that just very easily pulls right out. And then you'll repeat that process until you have the number of strands that you need. I'm just going to go ahead and separate out 3 strands here. Once your threads are separated, then it's time to go ahead and knot your thread and thread your needle. And you might hear some debate out there about whether or not you should use knots in embroidery. There are certainly pros and cons, but I think especially as a beginner, it's highly recommended that you go ahead and use knots, because it's really just going to ensure that all your stitches stay in place. So that being said, you can either knot your thread first or you can thread your needle first, either one, just a personal preference. I usually knot my thread first. There's obviously a number of techniques you can use to do this. I usually just like to kind of fold one end of my thread over top of the other, kind of create a loop, and then just tuck that loose end back underneath and through your loop. Pull that tight, and then you have your knot. If you have another method you prefer, that's certainly fine as well. There's not really a right or wrong with it. It's just whatever's comfortable for you. And I usually like to kind of snip off the loose ends there so that I don't have a big long tail, and that just helps when you're stitching to keep things nice and neat. Now to thread your needle, again, there are a number of techniques. I'm going to show you the technique that I like the best. You're just going to smooth out your strands, and then you're going to just secure your thread between your thumb and your index finger, and then take your embroidery scissors and snip that off. Snip that end off really close to your thumb and index finger. That's just going to give you a nice crisp edge and make threading your needle a little easier. Go ahead and maintain your grip on that, and then you're going to take your needle in your opposite hand, and you're just going to line up the eye of that needle over top of that thread. Now if you're having trouble seeing that, my first tip is to make sure that you have good lighting. Good lighting is going to be absolutely key when it comes to threading your needle. And then if you're still having trouble, go ahead and look for a crafting magnifier. There are lots of different ones available in all different price ranges. Just do a Google search, and you'll see a wide variety to choose from that can suit your own personal needs. Some of them even have lights included in them, which can help with the lighting issue as well. So again, you're just going to line up that eye of your needle over top of that thread. As you're sliding that down, open up your thumb and index finger, and you can see that your thread just pops right through the eye of that needle. Now please don't get discouraged if you need to attempt that a few times to get it. It does take a little bit of practice. And then if you are still struggling, what I would recommend doing is just using a little bit of beeswax. You can just lay your thread across the beeswax, secure it with your thumb, and then just pull that through. That beeswax will just coat the fibers of your thread, smooth everything out, and make it a little bit easier to work with. Then you're going to follow that same process of snipping off the end to get that nice crisp edge. Line up the eye of your needle, slide that over, opening up your thumb and index finger, and it'll just pop right through. So I have had some people ask me about needle threaders. They seem like a good idea in theory, but in my experience, they really aren't a huge help when it comes to embroidery thread. First of all, I'll show you a few that I have here. Many of them are designed for just one strand of thread, like you would use for sewing. So they just don't work as well when you're trying to thread multiple strands of thread. In fact, I've broken a number of needle threaders trying to thread multiple strands at once. And then also you'll notice, I'm going to grab this other needle here, which is actually on the larger side for embroidery needles. You'll see that the eye of the embroidery needle is very long and thin. And I found that a lot of needle threaders don't actually fit through the eye of that needle. And this one is, this is rather thin, little strip of metal here on this one, but it still does not fit through the eye of that needle. And even this wire one, in this case, does not fit through. Now, this little bird one, it does actually fit through, but again, if you can see, it's just a very tiny little hook there to pull your thread through. And so it's really designed more for one strand of thread versus multiple strands like we oftentimes use with embroidery. So if you have a needle threader that works great for you, perfect. You know, by all means, go ahead and use it, but please don't waste a lot of time and energy and money on trying to locate a needle threader that will work. Just put in a little bit of practice and you'll be threading your needle in no time. Another method that people sometimes like to use, I did use for a long period of time, is what I call the lick method, where you wet the end of your thread with your tongue to help smooth out those fibers. But again, I really don't recommend that method because it's really not the most sanitary method. Your thread ends up being a little bit soggy and gross. And secondly, the added moisture is really not that great for the longevity of your needle as well. So there's just more effective methods out there to thread your needle. But regardless of what method you choose, please know that this is a skill that you can absolutely master with just a little bit of practice. One more thing to keep in mind, when it comes to needles, I recommend going ahead and purchasing a pack that has multiple sizes in it. And the reason for that is that you don't want to use the same size needle regardless of how many strands of thread you're using. You really want your needle thickness to be about the same thickness as the thread you're using. And the reason for that is that if your needle's too large, it's going to create a larger hole than your thread can fill, and you're going to see those needle holes on your fabric. And if your needle is too small, you're going to have trouble pulling the thread through. You're going to have a lot more resistance, and it's going to start to that friction is going to start to kind of fray your thread a little bit, and it's just going to make the process of stitching a lot more difficult. So by purchasing a multi-pack like this, you're going to have a variety of sizes that you can use and kind of experiment with to see what works best for you. As a general guideline to just start with, I'm using 3 strands of embroidery floss here, and I'm using a size 7 DMC needle, and I find that this works very well. It very closely approximates the thickness of my thread. So that can kind of be a starting point for you, and then like I said, just kind of experiment, see what works best for you. Different brands can be a little bit different as well, so just something to keep in mind when it comes to your needles. All right, so finally we've come to the actual process of stitching, and there are 3 main tips that I feel can really be helpful, things that I found helpful when I first started learning embroidery, that can really affect not only the quality of your stitching, but also just how much you enjoy stitching as well. The first tip I have is to make sure to pay attention to the tail of your thread. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about this little bit of thread here that sticks out from the other side of your needle. It's really easy sometimes to accidentally pull that thread through the eye of your needle as you're stitching. And if that's happening frequently, it can start to get really frustrating because you're having to stop stitching to continuously rethread your needle. And that can really get in the way of how much you enjoy the process of stitching. So I tend to just hold my needle really close to the eye, which helps to secure both ends of that thread. But really it's just a matter of experimenting a little bit and seeing what works for you, and just kind of paying attention to if that tail is getting a little too short, just give that thread a little tug to pull it back through so that you're not having to stop needlessly to rethread that needle. And then my second tip is to really pay attention to your thread tension. If your tension is too loose, your stitches are going to start to get a little wobbly, and they're just not going to look really good. So you don't want it too loose, but then on the flip side, you also don't want your thread tension to be too tight, because that's going to affect the appearance as well. So I'll give you a little example here. If I pull this stitch too tight, you'll see what tends to happen is that the fabric will actually start to pucker underneath the stitches there. So you just really, what you're going for is for your stitches just to lay nice and smooth right on the surface of your fabric. You don't want any wobbly stitches or any fabric puckering. My final tip has to do with just making sure that you don't play what I like to call thread chicken, where you are running out of length of your thread and you try to just get those few more stitches in, and then you end up leaving yourself not enough thread to work with to, you know, properly knot things off and keep things neat and tidy at the end. So make sure that when you're getting low on thread, you're down to those last couple inches, go ahead and stop, knot off your thread, rethread the needle. It's worth it to do that. You're going to be much happier in the end doing that than trying to eke out those last couple stitches. So I'm just doing a basic back stitch here, and then once I have just those couple inches of thread left, I will go ahead and knot things off. And then I like to also weave my thread underneath my stitches, and I'll show you how to do that here. Nobody's going to see the back of your hoop, so we're not really worried about it being messy in that respect, and it certainly does not have to be perfect, but I try to avoid having the back of my hoop get too messy, because it can really affect the quality and the enjoyment that you get from your stitching, because if it gets too messy back here, things tend to get knotted up much more easily. I just find that it can lead to a lot of frustration, so I try to keep things neat, tidy. So once you have just those couple inches of thread left, go ahead and flip that hoop over. You're going to run your needle underneath your last stitch, and then just go ahead and back through the loop that's created when you run that needle under. So I'll show you that again. Just run that under and then back through that loop. And then go ahead and pull that tight, but make sure you're just pulling it tight enough to secure it. Don't pull it so tight that you distort that last stitch by affecting the thread tension of that last stitch. So tight, but not too tight. And then, like I said, I like to weave that tail back under my stitches a bit. And again, that just assists with keeping things a little more tidy on the back of my hoop and prevents problems that can arise when it gets too messy. So now one other thing to consider is that occasionally you'll run into a situation where you don't have a nearby stitch to knot off from. A good example of this is if you have single French knots that aren't clustered together in a group. So we're going to go ahead and do a single French knot here so I can show you what I mean by this. So there we have our little individual French knot. And if we flip our hoop back over, you can see there's nothing here to knot off from. Don't panic if you're in a situation like that. All you're going to do is just find the nearest stitch, run your needle under that stitch to anchor your thread, and then you'll use that stitch to knot off from. A lot of times I'll go ahead and kind of double knot that just to make sure it's secure. And I'll leave the ends under my stitches as I did previously. So one thing to keep in mind though is that this is going to create a line on the back of your fabric that, especially if you have a light colored fabric, you may be able, in a darker thread, you may be able to see that through the front of your fabric. And that's one reason that I recommend doubling up your fabric. It really does help to minimize the appearance of those thread lines through the front of your fabric. So just a little tip to keep in mind, if you double up your fabric, it really does help with that. So I know this was a lot of information to take in, but I felt like it would really be helpful to have kind of a comprehensive resource, especially if you're just beginning embroidery. And again, if you need some additional help or would like to review just a specific topic that was covered here, maybe threading your needle or separating your threads, something like that, feel free to check out the shorter videos that are linked in the comments. And thanks for watching.